Very good morning and welcome to all. Myself Devasmita Chakraborty, Faculty, Department of Computer Science, Sir Gurudas Mahavidyalaya. I welcome you all to our one-day college-level webinar on a quick tour of the neural network by our honorable guest and speaker for today, Dr. Saptarshi Goswami, jointly organized by the Department of Computer Science and IQAC of Sir Gurudas Mahavidyalaya. I request all participants to please keep their microphones on mute and video off during the session to ensure a noise-free experience. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box of Google Meet or live chat in YouTube, beginning your comment with a star or double star. In case of any network related issues, please be patient. We will resolve it as soon as possible. Before starting our webinar topic, I would request our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Sinjini Basu, to say something.
Uh, Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. Uh, I would like to welcome all of you, the faculty, the students, and especially the speaker for today's webinar organized by the Department of Computer Science of our college. Um, you know, this seems to be the only mode of academic engagement possible in these very unusual times. We have been doing this for over a year now, and it doesn't seem to, end this situation anytime soon. So this is the only way we can, continue with our academic work, with our academic engagement. Uh, I'm sure it's in no way these kind of virtual interactions can replicate the warmth of actual physical interactions, face-to-face communication. But given the circumstances, it seems as the best we can make of a very bad situation. I would like to specially thank our speaker for the day, Dr. Saptarshi Goswami, Assistant Professor of Computer Science, Bongobashi College Morning, for taking his time from, I'm sure, from what, cooped in our own rooms, and yet we are busier than ever. So, thank you very much for giving us the time and the privilege of your company. And I would really congratulate the department of computer science, its head of the department, Sri Debashish Bormon, and all the teachers for organizing this webinar, which I'm sure is going to be very conducive for our students and everyone else who is going to participate. So without further delay, I would ask all of us, ask the organizers to start the proceedings for the day. Thank you.
Now, I would like to request our respected head of the department, Professor Devashish Bormon, for his introductory speech.
A very good morning to all. Thank you to everyone who have joined with us at this morning. Myself, Devashish Bormon, heartily welcome all of you, and I am extremely delighted to become connected with you, who are all present from the same domain. Before carry on this event, I would like to thank to our principal, IQAC, and faculty members of our department to show their motivation and the support. Today, our webinar on neural network, which is a support, which is actually subpart of ML, and neural network is a specialized category of ML, which is a new pattern of our programming language based on basically on human neuron system. Traditionally, computer programs started from input to process, then output. Nowadays, output also considered. And I think our speaker will explain everything in his lecture. And National Education Policy 2020 also focuses on the skill-based learning systems, and ML, that is machine learning, which is also a skill. And by these days, with improvement of our new curriculum, that is CBCS systems, the whole things actually incorporate in our syllabus. So without wasting my time, let me introduce to our chief guest, Dr. Saptoshi Goswami, who is actually uh, engaged with in uh, academic session for a long days, and also years is in industry companies like Tata Infotech, PwC, Cognizant, and 8 years in academic. And currently he is working at Bongobashi College, Bangladeshi Morning College, and he is also engaged with 8 years in academic session. So he has already published 60 plus conference and journals, and he also created a series of YouTube lectures. You can Google it. He is also a member of data science and ODSC Kolkata chapter. His research interest basically includes the engineering, renewable energy forecasting, and text analysis. So I would like to request our speaker Saptoshi Goswami.
Yeah. So thank you, Professor Chakraborty, Professor Boshu, Professor Barmon for the warm welcome. And as all of you, rightly pointed out, probably we cannot really replicate the warmth that we could bring in the physical environment, but the show must go on. So hence we are meeting all of you virtually, and a very warm welcome to all the participants as well. Okay, coming on a meeting on a Saturday morning, showing the excitement or enthusiasm to learn about neural networks. Okay, so without further delay, let me share my screen. I hope I'm like audible well.
Yes, sir. You are audible.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Okay, so the screen is just coming up, maybe taking a little bit time. And generally, I have a content like what I'm going to cover. So today it's little bit of an
Very clear.
Perfect. Okay. So as I promised, I will give you a quick tour of neural networks, and giving that in like 1 hour or so is difficult, but let's see what we can achieve. Okay. And so again, some problem. Hold on. Yeah. Okay, so these things you already know, but just in case you need all the links on the same place, so here it is. You can go to my Google Scholar profile or YouTube profile or the blogging profile. So whatever medium I have actually contaminated with my data science related articles, blogs, and video lectures, you can get it here in one shot. I'm not going into details of this. Okay. All right. So now let's get started straight away. So can you guess any one of these celebrities? Okay. And don't feel shy or ashamed that you cannot recognize any one of them, because these people actually do not exist in reality. Okay. So these are generated by neural networks. Okay. Celebrity faces. Actually, there is a site on the same, and actually there is a technology behind which is called as deepfakes. Okay. So this deepfake actually can use deep learning, which is based on neural networks, such kind of realistic images and videos that you will take them as real. Okay. So I'm not going into the consequences of both positive and negative of the same, but I'm sure you'll find it fairly interesting. Okay. So this is one side. Another side is take agriculture. So there is this term now we call as smart farming or precision farming, where there is a lot of neural network that is getting used. So this particular application, you see that we are taking a picture with just your handheld mobile cameras on your of your farm, and then feeding it to your neural network, and it can identify that where there are some weeds or unwanted plants. And there are several other applications. So you can actually track the plant's growth, how it is going to grow. You can like predict when there will be flowers, and so on and so forth. So a lot of applications in agriculture. Another very important area, okay, where I'm sure many of you have seen application is healthcare. So this is one example where there are a lot of medical notes which is in terms of textual data. There are image data. That in medical there will be images coming from X-ray or ECG or so many other kind of imaging modes, and they can be used or employed by these deep neural networks, okay, for proper diagnosis. Also, this is another scenario where there is an interaction with what we say like sensors. So it is more of IoT kind of a scenario where there are a lot of clinical sensors. They give a feedback to you might see that there is written convolutional network. So convolutional network is also type of a deep neural network, which probably I will cover a little bit at the end of the lecture. But the idea is that in healthcare also there are a lot of applications that you see in deep neural network. So this is just to make you feel a little bit interested and excited about the limitless capabilities that deep learning or the deep neural networks are offering. Okay, so now I think let's go ahead and look at formal definition of neuron. Okay, so always when we started with this grand vision of AI, right? So what was the most exciting thing, or what was the grand goal of AI? The grand goal of AI was to kind of recreate artificial brain. Okay, because that brain is kind of the epitome of your intelligent activities, right? So everything generates from there. So the grand vision, if you want to summarize in one line, it would be to create an artificial brain. And these neurons are actually the fundamental units of brain and nervous system. Okay, so these cells are responsible for receiving sensory inputs from external world, for sending motor commands to our muscles. So this is the biological neuron that we are talking about, and for transforming and relaying the electric signal in every step in between. Okay, so though this term was coined in late 19th century, the actual structure was unknown until the advent of microscope. So at that point of time, people were thinking a lot about how these neurons work, and I think year 1906, okay, two people got Nobel Prize for trying to understand the structure of neural network. And probably very interesting, and only one time in the history of maybe Nobel Prize, they were giving contradictory theories. So one scientist was telling that neurons are interconnected units, and another was telling that neurons can work as standalone units. But think of the challenge at that point of time, that you did not see neuron because you don't have a microscope and you cannot see how it actually looks. So what all you were doing was conjectures, your theories, your assumptions. Okay, so very difficult at that point of time, right, for science. Okay, and if you compare, so as I could convince you that probably neurons are the ones which kind of symbolizes the intelligent activity. So here is a comparison of number of neurons in different species in billions. Okay, so you see that humans, so this is not the overall neurons, so you have more neurons, but these are the neurons which are applicable for intelligent activity. And you can see that why human beings are most considered the most intelligent species. Okay, so again, I am trying to connect you that you can take the neurons to be the basic unit of intelligence. Okay, so now it is we are trying to, so anytime we are trying to look at from different disciplines, the thing that we do is we try to model it in with some assumptions, and for that we need to look at the functionality in a more critical manner. Okay, so we have understood that a neuron is a basic computation unit. So you see this figure over here, you can see this figure over here. Okay, so there are signals that is going into a neuron and there are signals going out. So these are called as dendrites. Okay, from which a neuron can take input from other neurons, and also if the inputs are able to excite the neuron enough, there will be output through this axon. Okay, so this long stem like thing is called as axon, and through this axon terminal it goes to other neurons. Okay, the most important thing perhaps is there are a lot of them which are interconnected, and together they can perform complex tasks. So as we are going to artificial neural network, this much of introduction to the biological neurons was essential. Okay, and how these neurons are actually make you take decisions. So let's say you are seeing some scene from the movie, right? So you are taking a lot of cues. Okay, so maybe you are looking at the visual of like how the actor is making a face, maybe, or something is happening, maybe someone is falling down, okay, in a funny manner, and then maybe there is something with the speech, how they are speaking, right? Or maybe there are some texts that are coming up which is actually making you laugh, right? And all these, what I am trying to tell you is that probably these are taken by or handled by different neurons. So again, this is a very simplified view. We are showing that there are 4 neurons which are involved. Okay, and we are saying like how these are connected in the decision making. That probably if two of these 3 neurons, where one of them which is for the visual, one of them for the audio, and one of them for the text, right? So if 2 of them appears to be funny, probably it will make you laugh. Okay, so the idea over here is that there are multiple neurons which work parallelly, and then there is a combined decision making. Okay, and of course there is this concept of division in labor. So there are multiple layers, there are multiple neurons, and there is kind of a division of labor where individual neurons are focusing on stimuli from one particular channel. Okay, now it is time to try to formalize it. So it was 1943 when McCullough and Pete, 2 gentlemen, tried to formalize these biological neurons in a mathematical model of computation. Okay, so this you can say as the first artificial neurons. Okay, and not both of them were computer scientists. I think none of them were computer scientists, but one was a mathematician and another probably a logician. Okay, so they came up with this idea. So what they are saying is that so this was a very simple model. Look at this very carefully. Okay, so you have different inputs which are represented by x1 to xn, and it was a very simple model that they were coming up with. So they put a restriction that x1 to xn will have a value 0 or 1. So basically they're binary inputs that is going to the system, and you see that there is written as g. So this is a function which actually aggregates the inputs. Okay, which actually aggregates the inputs. So when I gave you the last example, so there were inputs coming from different media, right? So g is actually aggregating them, and what f is doing, based on the aggregated value of g, it is trying to take a decision. So as I said that if it is more than 2, then it is going to appear fun. So this more than 2 part based on g is taken care of f. So if it is more than 2, your output is 1, else it is 0. Okay, from biological neuron point of view, you tell that when it is more than 2, the neuron fires. Okay, so let's take an example. So what kind of way this can be used? So you might think that we were talking about something very grand, where we are thinking of recreating artificial brain, and now we have really come down to very basic level tasks where we are taking binary input and taking binary output. Well, the model development always starts like that, okay, with baby steps, with simpler assumptions, baseline models. So if you look at this particular the MP neuron, where it can be used is, so let's say you are trying to make a choice that whether you will watch a movie or not. So this Y is actually representing your decision to watch the movie. So if it is 0, you will not watch. If it is 1, you will watch it. And X1, X2, X3, which are your inputs, are maybe different factors like, is it a thriller? Is Akshay Kumar in the movie? Does the movie have a rating of 6+ in IMDb? So all these are actually binary inputs, and you think, so you can add more, right? If you have time available, okay, or if you have recently watched such kind of movies, and so on and so forth. But based on these things, you are going to arrive at a decision, okay, whether you will watch the movie or not. And you see that this kind of decision we take every day for so many things. And this GX is actually represented with this sigma notation, where you are summing across all the inputs, okay, starting from X1 to Xn. Okay, this is your GX. And your Fx is actually a function of GX. So when it is greater than theta, which is often called as the threshold, your value is 1 L0. So basically this should read as greater than equal to theta, then 1 L0. And when we said about when it is more than 2, in case of the first example that we are talking, the theta was actually 2. You might be wondering that, okay, this looks to be too simple to be useful. So where can we use it? The first test people put MP neurons to, where can they implement basic Boolean functions? So that was the first task that was given to MP neurons. And all of you know the truth table for OR, right? So if you have two binary variables x, y, you have this x plus y, which is x or y. Any of the inputs, if it is 1, then you get the output as 1. So can we implement this using MP neuron? Okay. So what can be the value of theta? It turns out that we can simply implement it like this. So you have x1 and x2 over here. You are summing it up, and when the value is greater than equal to 1, you get the value as 1 L0. So the Boolean function you can implement using MP neuron, and not only OR, you will see that many of the Boolean functions you can implement using MP neuron. Okay. And there is also a geometrical interpretation of this, right? So this is what is the fun, that looking at the same thing from different angle. So if I try to plot this in your classical coordinate geometry kind of thing, right? So you can see that these are the 4 points: 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. And what you want to do is you actually want to draw a line. So here you can think that the line is represented by x1 plus x2 equal to 1. So you will agree that this is the line. And now once you have a line, what you are actually telling is that if it is on the left side, okay, or if it is on the line, or on the right side of the line, then the output is 1. And if it is on the left side, then the value is 0, right? So this is the geometric interpretation of this particular Boolean function or MP neuron. And you could understand that there was a lot of sophistication that was required. So MP neuron actually graduated to another neural unit called as perceptron, which came around 1957. Okay, So there are few changes that were brought about, and when now we still talk about a term called as MLP, which stands for multi-layer perceptron. Actually, the perceptron dates back from 1957. Okay, so what are the changes? Let's see. So the changes are that the now inputs now can have different weights. So what we are trying to tell is that maybe what we are seeing visually has more effect on what we are seeing as text. Okay, so I want to give different weight to them. So that was not possible in MP Neuron. You made it possible over here. And you also allowed this x1, x2, x3 to have real values. So it is no longer Boolean. So if you remember, when we are talking about this IMDb rating, we like artificially made it a binary by saying that whether it is more than 6 or not, right? So here it is allowed. You can have real valued inputs. And most important, the weight parameters are learnable. So what do I mean by that? So earlier in MP Neuron, what was happening was that you need to specify the value of theta or whatever you know the function, you have to encode it or hard code it in the MP Neuron. But perceptron, it is not required. So if you give it a function, okay, that these are your x's and these are your y's, this perceptron actually can learn the weights. So when I say weights, so these are these W1, W2, W3 that we are talking about. So these are also called as the parameters of the network. Okay. So now it is a more schematic or more clearer diagram of what we were discussing. So more terms will be clear to you now. So here you see that you have different weights x1, x2, x3, xn, which has associated weights like W1, W2, W3, and so on, which are getting aggregated. Often you call this as transfer function because this is transferring this input to the final output. And then you have something called as an activation function. So what we earlier discussed in case of MP neuron, so this is the F and this is your G. Okay, so this G, you are giving a fancy name as activation function, and whatever is coming out as the output, you are calling it as an activation. And if you remember that we talked about theta at many cases, so that is your threshold. If this net input is greater than the threshold, then it fires. Okay. So let's continue with perceptron. So now if I try to, we said that perceptron actually can have weights. Okay. So if I try to do, find out the same, that if I can implement a or not. Okay. I can take different weights, and you will see something like a W0, which is actually called as a bias. We'll come to this in a short while. Okay. So basically what we can do is we can actually create different kind of linear equations. Okay. A system of linear equations from this particular truth table, and I can get different conditions from which I can get some clear values of W0, W1, and W2. Now you will see that these are in terms of inequality. So actually there will be a solution region, not a unique solution, but essentially you will still have something like this. And here what we have done is that we have got the value of 1.1 x1, 1.1 x2. So these are values of W1 and W2, and this W0 is taken as -1. So I will now stop and tell you a little bit about W0. So this is actually called as bias. This is actually called as bias, and if you can think roughly like this, that if the net input, when I talk about net input, I am only talking about x1 and x2. I am not considering bias as an input, is more than the bias, then actually your neural network fires. Now, I have seen a very common confusion among students that, so what this bias is actually? I understand there are some inputs going on and the output is dependent on that. So where is this bias coming from? So it is like this, that we were taking of a movie example, right? So you have some personal preferences. So you might be a movie buff. right? You might be a movie buff and you have a very, what I would say, very open choice. Okay, that if it is a good movie, you know, you are going to watch it. You really don't care about who is directing it, you know, what genre it is. You know that, okay, it has a good rating, you are going to watch. So then we say that you have a less bias. Are you understanding? So the net input doesn't have to be really very large to make you watch the movie. But on the other side, if you are a very seasoned, you know, movie watcher, you only watch, you know, movie after seeing lot of reviews, and if they are only from certain genre, and if they are only by some very reputed directors, then your bias is very high, right? So that's where actually this bias comes into play. Okay. Now, so far so good. We have understood that there is biological neuron, which is kind of the unit of intelligence. And we have also seen that how we can model this in artificial neuron, first through MP units and then through perceptron. Now, is there a connection of perceptron with machine learning? Okay. So maybe for many of you, the machine learning term itself is not very familiar or not clear, but I will not you know, go into details of that. I will try to give you a general idea. So there is a very popular you know, there is a very popular thread of machine learning or track of machine learning, which is called as supervised learning. Okay. So in supervised learning, what happens is that you want a computer program to do some task for you. Okay. And what you do is you actually have shown him some kind of data. So this data actually plays the role of a teacher. So that's why you call it as a supervised learning. And you know, you give him level data, like in this case, you know, you have given this program. So this is nothing but a program. Okay. These inputs, that these are images of duck, and you also have labeled them. Okay, that, you know, this is the image of a duck, this is the image of a duck, this is not a duck, this is not a duck. And with this, you know, machine learning framework, you get a model as an output. Now, if you give a unlabeled data, so you see that these are not marked. This has now developed a capability. This has now developed a capability of identifying these as a duck. Okay, so this is supervised learning. Hold on to supervised learning for now. And actually, again, if you look at a geometric representation of the same, okay, and here I am not talking about dark and not dark. This is a different example where, again, there are two categories. So this dark and not dark, right? So these are called as categories or classes. Okay, and what we have done is we have represented them by two variables, x1 and x2. So the surviving companies and falling companies are the two classes that we are dealing with, and x1 and x2 are two inputs by which you actually have measured each of the company. So all the points that we have drawn over here, okay, all the points that we have drawn over here are actually, you know, different companies. Okay, so each point actually represents a company. Okay, and like this case, what you want to do is, you want to, so if there is an unknown company, right, which is not marked, you don't know, right, in this, like this case, that whether it is surviving or falling. So if they give you the data of x1 and x2 for that company, you can plot it over here. And if you see, okay, it is on the left side of this line, you will say that this is going to fall. Okay, I hope the idea is clear to you. Now, do you see a connection? Do you see a connection with your you know, classification algorithms and perceptron? The similarity is that both of them are actually trying to draw a line, or, you know, cutting this measurement space. So we call this as a measurement space. Often we call this also as a feature space. Okay, into two halves. Right. So if it is in this boundary, then it is falling. If it is in this boundary, then it is surviving. So perceptron also was actually trying to do that. So I'm just trying to make a case that perceptron can be used as a classifier. Okay, and you might be a little skeptic that sir, all of these that you are showing us are actually in 2D plane. Okay, but it is very unrealistic that we are going to measure all quantities of interest using only 2 variables. So you are right. So here is an example where you see that we have plotted them in a 3D, and now we are not looking at a line, but we are looking at a plane. If you generalize it more, so if you go to more than 3 dimension, then we don't call it as a plane, we call it as a hyperplane. Okay. So as you take to more dimension in perceptron, so when there are 3 inputs, you are drawing actually a plane. If it is more than 3 inputs, you are actually trying to draw a hyperplane. Okay, and this is probably one of the most used and abused block of machine learning. Okay, that in traditional computer program, you have the data and the program. So let's say you are trying to find out whether a particular program is a particular integer is prime or not. So you have written a program over here, right? So you give it as an input to the computer, it gets compiled. Then you give an input, data input, maybe a number, and it gives you the output that it is either a prime or it is not a prime. Whereas what happens in a machine learning program is that what you gave is the data. So data were the images of the ducks and those animals, and the output also, because the output was the level of them. So that also you gave as an input. And this computer have now developed a capability, okay, which, when given an image, can tell whether it is a duck or it is not a duck. Okay, so as it is learning, so at a very crude sense, you don't have, when you are with computer science and software, you don't have like machines, heavy duty drilling kind of machines here. So what you have is your program, which are your computers, which are your machines, and you are actually making it learn the rules to go from the data to the output. Okay, so that's why the term machine learning. So it's a quick example. So there are set of problems where we know the exact steps to follow. So we have done these common exercises. Even I was telling about this prime number, right? Find whether a number is prime or not, calculate the GCD of 2 numbers, calculating factorial of a number. So we exactly know what steps to be followed. Okay, and we follow this, right? So these are not problems where we use machine learning and we use traditional kind of computer programs over here. Contrast this with the example that we see, that whether a particular user will like a movie or not. Can you come up with really a set of closed rules that, okay, if this is this, then he will watch a movie or not? No, it is not a sacrosanct set of rules which will be valid for all cases. It is not going to be like that. And it turns out that there are several common examples. So if a person will default in a loan or not, again, you cannot give a generalized rule. Okay, and okay, so it's time for a meme. So what is machine learning through memes? So it is actually, so it comes from actually Wikipedia definition. So which kind of says that it is sum of maths and algorithm. Okay, but taking the message really seriously. So these are 2 subjects. If you are interested in machine learning, you need to learn. You of course do not want to come up with a weird looking animal like this, but these are the 2 pillars of machine learning. Okay, so in 1969, McKinsey and Papert, another 2 very prominent AI researchers, came up with a monograph where they talked about the challenge that can you actually solve XOR using your perceptron. Okay, so you are saying that perceptron can do so many things. Okay, so perceptron was actually giving a lot of promises. So can you simply just do this XOR problem? And it turned out that if you try to put this in form of equations, they are quite contradictory. So one place you get W0 is less than 0, then you get W2 is greater than minus W0, W1 is greater than minus W0, and then finally you get W1 plus W2 is less than minus W0. So when W1 and W2 both are greater than minus W0, this is not possible, right? So you are getting a conflict over here. And if you get a conflict, that means that there is no solution possible. Okay. So if you look at this pictorially, so these are the ones that are marked in red are the zeros, and the ones that are marked in blue are your ones, right? Can you just stop for a moment and think that this simple problem, can you draw a line? Okay, can you draw a line which actually separates the zeros and ones, like we could do for other Boolean functions? So if you think for a little while, then we'll realize that it is not possible. Okay. So this paper actually had a lot of impact, and the research in AI. So there were different AI winters that this neural network development has gone through. So this paper actually again heralded another AI winter. Okay. And I will tell you that, of course, so basically we tell these kind of things that these two classes are not linearly separable. And why we are talking about linearly separable? Because we convinced you, few slides earlier, that perceptron has this capability to draw a line which separates one class from the other, right? So that means when it is possible, and we said that this is how this is related to the machine learning task. So it can be used in a machine learning classification kind of task if the two classes are linearly separable. Okay. However, in real life, you can have a class like this, right? So this is one class, the blue is another class, and this orange is another class. And you can look at it and understand that you cannot separate them by lines. Okay. So perceptron will also fail in this case. Similar, you can have a case like this where you cannot separate them, right? So non-linearly separable cases were actually challenging the capability of perceptron. Now, what happened is that people thought that why don't I? So who has told me that I will have to create only one set of lines? Okay, can I not use multiple lines? So perceptron can draw a line, and let's say I want this to be 0 or this to be 1, whatever. Okay, this particular region, which is of course not linearly separable, right? If I want to do like this, how can I use perceptron? So they thought that let us do something like this. Okay, let us create multiple perceptrons. So this perceptron, it will take inputs x and y. Okay, this perceptron will draw a line. Okay, maybe this is the output of this neuron. Okay, so this is your layer 1 neuron or layer 1 perceptron. Okay, and what you are doing is you are getting an output of S1 over here. So this is drawing this line, and you are fine with this, right? Because one perceptron can draw one line. There is no problem with this. Now S2 can also draw a line. So probably S2 is drawing this line. And now you can put another perceptron on top of this. So this is taking this S1 and S2 as input. Okay, and it is just checking that whether this is within this S1 and S2, or so you are probably checking that whether S1 is greater than 0 and S2 is less than S1 is greater than equal to 0 and S2 is actually less than equal to 1. At that point, your output will be 0, else it will be 1. Okay, so like this way you can also solve the XOR problem, because if you take multiple lines, so if I just go back over here, so you see that if I'm allowed to draw now multiple lines, okay, I can definitely separate them out, right? So I will use one perceptron here. Okay, so this will be my layer 1 perceptron, these two, and then I will use another perceptron which will take input from there and can actually solve this XOR problem. So this was a fantastic idea. Okay, then we call this as multi-layer perceptron. So this multi-layer perceptron, what we saw was there for quite some time. So this development that I'm telling you was around 1980s. Okay, that time frame, and we call those network that came at that point of time, which we also called as multi-layer perceptron. So that there was a set of layers which were taking inputs, and then there were these hidden layers. So these layers were the ones which we are drawing the in between lines, okay, not the final line. So these layers, we started calling them as hidden layers, okay. So this was what was present at that point of time. And later on, we migrated to deep networks where you have multiple hidden layers, okay. So why this is required, I may cover at the end of end of the lecture. But the idea is that when there is one hidden layer, we call this as the shallow network, and if there are more than one hidden layer, we call this as a deep neural network. Okay, so again a quick summary. So we have seen that the neural net can be, a biological neural net can be modeled using an MP unit. This MP unit was further improved by perceptron. Perceptron had an issue that it can only draw a line, so it can solve only linear type of problems, linear type of classification problem. Then we saw that if we can make a multi-layer perceptron, then I can solve complex decision boundary. Okay, so that's the summary. Now I will introduce you to more mathematics, okay, because that will be essential to understand further. So I abstract this as a model, right? So I tell this multiple layers of perceptron as a model. So this can be a single perceptron, this can be multiple layers, and so on and so forth. And it has different inputs, like earlier case. So maybe these are your inputs, x1, x2, x3. Okay, and they have corresponding weights associated. Okay, there are corresponding weights associated, which are like W1, W2, W3. You can have a bias, right? So all this goes as input, and the models gives you a output. So these you often represent as y hat. So earlier, if you remember, that you are representing the output as y. Now you are representing it as y hat. Why this difference? Because y is the actual output, and y hat is the output this model is producing. So it is not necessarily that from the very beginning this y and y hat will be same. Okay, so y hat can be thought as a function of x, which is the input, and theta. What is theta? Theta is actually you can think it as a vector, so nothing but an array, which is a collection of the weights and biases. Okay, so this is your y hat, and what you want. So of course, this model is represented by some parameters theta. For a linear regression, it is the intercept and slope term. I am not really going into what is linear regression now. So this is also type of a model, and what we are trying to tell is that what is the theta for that particular model. So for a neural network, it is number of nodes, number of layers, weights, activation function, which are actually the theta. So y hat is actually a function of that. Now you have already seen number of nodes, number of layers, weights, and even I have talked about activation function. So this should be clear to you. Okay, and now you define another function which is called as a loss function, which actually measures how close is your model output with the actual output. Okay, so this should be very, very close, and this loss function actually measures this closeness. Okay, and so there are further terminologies when we calculate this deviation for a single instance. So typically what happens in a data-centric machine learning task, so you have a tabular series of data that is given, and if there are 100 observations, there will be 100 rows in the table. Okay, and there will be corresponding inputs and outputs. Okay, so basically if you find out y and y hat and find the difference for one observation, so these are called as observations, as I said, or instances, you call it as a loss function, and if you calculate for the entire data set, you call it as a cost function. So these are again terminology, and what you are trying to do is you are actually trying to solve an optimization problem. So we told initially that the perceptron can actually learn weights. Now we are trying to put that solution of that piece of the puzzle, that how can I find the weights. Okay, so what we are trying to convince you here is that this can be formulated as an optimization problem, that I will try to find appropriate values of theta so that y hat, which is my model output, is really close to the actual output. Okay, so that's the setting of the problem. Okay, so this is in more notation terminologies. Again, just don't get intimidated by looking at so much of maths. So basically, this x, what is input? Okay, so this is, so neural network is a function of x and theta. So this is what we were talking about. So x is your input vector, theta are the model parameters, which we are calling as weight and biases. And we talked about this cost function here, right? So you measure how good your model parameter is by looking at the cost function. Okay, and y hat is your reference output when x is the input, and then you find out the difference, and then you update the parameters accordingly so that it comes closer. Okay, so your target is find theta that minimizes c theta. So this is the same thing that we discussed in the last slide also, but in a more mathematical notation. Okay, now how actually we measure theta? So we are going into a little bit of a maths here, but don't worry about it. Okay, I will try to make things simpler. So you see that we have written something as JW here. What is this JW? JW is nothing but the loss function. Okay, this loss function or the cost function. And what is W? W is actually the parameter. So we are simply assuming that there is only one parameter. And this is how actually JW looks like. Okay, so then what you want to do is you want to find out that what minimizes the difference between the actual output and the desired output, or the model output and the actual output. So you actually want to find, you want to go to a value like this. So what you are trying to tell is that you will start with a random value of W. So random value of W means you can go anywhere like this. You can start from here. Okay. And so if this is your value, what next you are going to do is you are going to find out the derivative of the error with respect to W. So how will you do that? So in this point, just try to change W little bit. Let's say increase W little bit. What happens to my JW? My JW actually goes down, right? My JW actually goes down if I change this little bit. Okay. So what will be then my magnitude of del Z del W, right? So this is just partial derivative, because the idea is if you have multiple parameters and if you want to find the derivative, you keep the other variables and constant and take the derivative with respect to that variable. So that you call as partial derivative, right? So so let's come back what we are discussing. So if I was at this point, okay, what is my gradient here? My gradient, the magnitude or sign of the gradient. I'm just interested in the sign of the gradient. The sign of the gradient here is negative, right? So if I use an equation like this, so this is a negative quantity. Okay, here is a negative. So negative, it will become positive. So what will happen is my weight, this equation is telling me that if I am somewhere where I am at a negative gradient, use this equation, then I will move to the value that I want, which minimizes this difference between the actual output and the model output. Okay. Similarly, you can try over here. So here you will get a positive gradient, and as you get a positive gradient, you will see that this equation is telling you that you reduce W. That means that it is suggesting you move towards this direction, and you can understand. So that way you can reach again the minimum value. Okay. Now this algorithm, which actually calculates gradient, and following the gradient you can reach the minimum value, is called as gradient descent. And many literature you will be seeing it is being referred as GD. Okay. And it is not for only two-dimensional plane. You can actually have a 3D plane where even you can apply GD and reach the minimum value. Okay. Now, gradient descent is not something new. Okay. So I was telling about this linear regression type of problem. So this is also a supervised kind of problem, but the output is not a target value like classification, but a numeric output. So a very simple example can be, you are trying to find out that based on some person's experience, what should be their expected salary level, right? So in x-axis you have the experience, in y-axis you have the expected salary. And there, what you are trying to do is you are actually trying to draw a line. So these are your actual points, and you are trying to draw or get a model like this, like the red line is representing. And essentially what we are doing is we are starting with, so here so you remember from your high school that equation of a straight line is y equal to mx plus c. So in this case, the parameters are m and c. So every step what you are seeing is that what is the error, how far you are from the actual observation, and then following the gradient you are adjusting m and c. So ultimately you are getting optimal value of m and c. So gradient descent is basically a framework. Any kind of model which has parameters, you can use gradient descent to find the parameters. Okay. So now, if you remember that so far what we were talking about in our perceptron was that we were taking the inputs, we are aggregating it, and if it is beyond a certain threshold, we are giving a value of 1, else it was 0. So there were two problems with this. One problem was it was not differentiable. So you might ask me that why differentiation is required. So we just told you that we are going to use gradient descent to find the parameters. That works on gradient, which is nothing but finding the derivative. So I need a function which is actually differentiable. And there is one other thing, that let's say if so my threshold is 5. Okay, so maybe I am in the same movie going example. The threshold is 5, and when I add up these different values of input, I get a value of 4.999, right? So in this case, I will not watch the movie. And if the aggregated value is 5.001, then I will watch the movie. So do you really think that these two movies are very different from each other? No, they are not, right? So here we have a very sharp boundary. So these are two problems that the perceptrons were having. So what we did now was we came up with something more smooth. So it is, this also looks similar to this graph, right? So you start with 0 and move to 1, but this is much more smooth. Okay. And, this type of function are actually called as logistic function or sigmoid function. Okay. And the equation is given like this. Again, don't worry too much about this. So see, this is what? This is nothing but the sum of, this is nothing but the sum of bias, sum of the inputs and the bias, right? And you are using this function now to calculate y. Okay. And you can just take some random values and test it. So what is the random value? So the random value is, so you can check what is, if this value is very large. Okay. So if this value is very large, what will happen is, so this is very large, so you can think that this is to be infinity. So it is e to the power minus infinity. So you can take that as 1 by 1 plus 1 by infinity, something of this sort. So this will be tending to 0. So you'll get a value of 1. So our intuition is matching, that if my input has a very high value, so as a result of this, this is also very high, then my chance of firing will be close to 1. Are you getting me? So the same intuition is holding. And similarly, we can state a test for when this value is very less, and in that case you will see that this quantity will be actually infinity. Okay. So 1 by 1 plus infinity, it will be 0. Okay. So if the input is again very, very small, then it will not fire. So whatever we were thinking so far, this function is also matching that. Additionally, what we have got is, we have got now a much smoother boundary, and this function is differentiable. So it is a function, you can look at this and you understand that this is a differentiable function. Okay. So we already told that these are called as activation functions. Okay. And addition to this differentiability, it brings something else, which is your nonlinearity. As a result of that, now just using a perceptron, you can draw a nonlinear boundary. You even do not know multilinear perceptron. Okay, you can just use this function and you can get a nonlinear boundary out of it. Okay. And okay, so one thing that I didn't explain, I missed out in this slide was, sorry, that there was a parameter called as alpha. You see that? So this is a constant value which we call as learning rate. Okay, and why I don't, why I don't make it directly proportional to gradient? There are several reasons to that. Okay, so this alpha actually tells you the speed you reach to the speed by which you actually reach your minima. Okay, so here, so if you are starting from here and if you have a small alpha value, okay, then you will, if this is your starting point, you will very slowly go to the minimum. And you might challenge me, or you might ask me that why should I do that? I should have a very large value of alpha, right? So the problem of having a large value of alpha is, and let me also tell you that this is often called as a step size, by which you are moving and going to the next step is often called as a step size. So if I keep a large value of alpha, what happens is that you start from here, you know you have to go in this direction, but because of large alpha, you have taken a very large step and you have reached here. Okay, and when you are here, again you have taken a very large step. You know you are going in the right direction, but you are crossing it over, and that way you can see that you will end up oscillating. And when you can reach here, actually you say the algorithm has converged. So if you have a high learning rate, what will happen is this algorithm will never converge. Okay, so now I am going into a little bit more maths, but please stay tuned with me, because I cannot omit this if I talk about neural network. Now, one problem that happened, or one challenge that happened, was that they understood that they will apply gradient descent. Okay, and this was working fine when they were using this perceptron and this sigmoid functions as activation functions and learning the weights. But a problem started coming in that, okay, I am getting the error over here, right? So look at this. So this is an input layer which is represented by I1 and I2. So this is nothing but the bias. Okay, and these points that are added over here, you see, are actually telling you the different values of weight. So here, I1 has a weight of 0.15 for W1. I1 has a weight of 0.20 for H2. Okay, so similarly, you have weights for I2. And you have the output, two output neurons over here. Okay, which also have corresponding output. Now the question was that, of course, I can find the difference between actual input and the model output, or actual output and the model output, which we call as error. Okay, and find a way to adjust the weight of this layer. Okay, please understand. I can adjust the weight of this layer. So you remember, right, the equation that I was using. So for all this W1, W2, W3, W4, W5, W6, W7, W8, what I'm going to do is I am going to do the gradient descent. And I'm going to follow the same equation. What was the equation? That my new W is actually a function of my current W and my learning rate and the gradient. Okay. So this was the equation, right? So I am going to do that for all 8 equations. And I can do that quite well for W5, W6, W7, W8, because I can calculate the gradient over here. This gradient is nothing but gradient of the error. Okay, so this del W is nothing but the gradient of the error or gradient of the loss function, whatever you call it. Okay, one and the same thing. But how do I calculate the error over here? So these also actually halted the development of neural network for quite some time. And then another very important algorithm which came in was called as backpropagation. So backpropagation and gradient descent are actually very related. So you can think that gradient descent can work, when you have like kind of one layer, and gradient descent with backpropagation actually helps you. So this is a tool by which you can calculate the gradient of the errors with respect to this initial layer weights. Okay, so there are several equations, and which are simple ones. You see that we are calling this as net input to H1. following similar kind of things, right? W1 into I1 plus W. So this is what we have been doing. So this is what I am getting as an input to H1. Then I am going to use the logistic function. So you see, so this is why I have explained you all this. Okay, now I think this math should not be difficult for you. So this is going as an input to H1. This is the output that is coming out. Okay. Similarly, like I have shown you the output of H1, I can get the output of H2. Now H1 and H2, like that example you had S1 and S2. So these outputs will go to O1 and O2, right? So I can get net O1 like this, again using a linear equation, and finally that there will again be a logistic function which will give me the output. Okay, so this way, when I calculate, I take the input and I see that what is my what is my output that I'm receiving. So you see that actually the output expected was 0.01 from O1 and 0.99 from O2. But here from O1, I have got a output of 0.75. So there is a lot of change that needs to be made in the weight. I need to reduce the weight basically. Okay, and output O2 also comes to be 0.77. Okay, so I calculate the error now. Okay, target like what is my target and what I have got as output, and I calculate for both of the outputs. Okay, so this is my error. Now there is an interesting step which I call as back propagation. So this step where I take the inputs and find out that what is the model output. So this is called as forward path or forward pass or forward propagation. And now when I use the same thing to calculate the gradients or gradients of the individual layers, that is called as back propagation. So you can understand that the back propagation here can be calculated very easily. Okay, in this layer there is no problem. However, when I'm trying to find the back propagation on later layers, I am going to use simply the chain rule of partial derivatives, right? So okay, that if you are basically trying to find a derivative like this, right, which is x cube. Okay, so what do? You actually assume that this is like a function of x. Okay, so, and you will make like maybe 3x square. Okay, and then a 2 will come over here, and then you will again take a derivative of x square with respect to x and will get a 2x. Okay, so this is the chain rule, right? So if I know the derivative here, I can apply chain rule and I can get the derivatives in initial layers. So that's just the basic intuition of back propagation, that gradient descent coupled with or powered with this chain rule of calculus actually can help you learn weights across multiple layers of a deep neural network. Okay. Now there is a very interesting theorem called as universal approximation theorem. So this universal approximation theorem actually tells that perceptrons are actually very strong machine which can learn any difficult function between x and y. So basically what you are trying to find out. So you have some y, okay, and you have some x, and y is a function of x. So if you have a machine which can actually learn this f, however complicated this f is, you can think that this is a universal learning machine. Okay, so which actually tells you the power of perceptron. So it turns out that if you have a really complex function, you can think that you can break them in small rectangular pieces, okay, and you can think that they are addition of this, right? So you see that this complex function can be approximated by these small rectangular blocks, right? So if I add them up, I can do that. So now you might ask me that, okay, that is fine, but how this relates to the perceptron story that we were harping so far? So just think about it, that you have some input going over here, okay, and so even forget about perceptron. Let's say you are using threshold function. Let's say you are using threshold function. Even just using threshold function, just making it lag little bit, or subtracting one from the other, okay, you can come up with sort of a rectangular block like this, right? So what we are trying to tell is that if I have a set of inputs, so one perceptron or one neuron can give me output like this. Another neuron can give me output like this. If I just subtract this from this, I can get something like this, which is like a rectangular block. Okay, which is like a rectangular block. And now you can understand that if I can stack such inputs, or I can stack such units, I can get, so one such unit can give me one rectangle, so I can get multiple rectangles and just add it up, right? So that's the basic idea why perceptron is so powerful and can actually approximate any unit, any undefined and real valued function. Okay, so here is a quick summary of the neural network journey so far. So 1943, you had MP neuron. 1962, you have this perceptron. 1969, we came up with this XOR dilemma. And then we saw that we can solve this using a multi-layer perceptron. The multi-layer perceptron had a challenge of, learning the weights, because there are multiple layers, how to calculate the errors at initial layers. So you had back propagation. But still after 1985 also, deep neural networks was not so much used, okay, because the training of deep neural networks were quite difficult. So at 2005, okay, 2005-6 range, the founding father of deep learning, Geoffrey Hinton and his group came up with a strategy which is called as unsupervised pre-training, much beyond the scope of today's lecture. Okay, if you are interested, I can really discuss about this. This was a very beautiful idea, okay, which they employed and showed the world that these deep neural networks can be trained. Okay, and after, so this process went about maybe up to 2009, and after that there has been a lot of development in the neural network. Okay, so at this point of time, there was a need to contrast machine learning with deep learning, because we said machine learning also classifies, deep learning also classifies. So just a quick comparison. So deep learning actually works on large amount of data. Machine learning can work on small data. It is computation heavy. Machine learning not always. Okay, accurate conclusion can drawn, but actually from raw data. So this is the most important term, raw data. So machine learning needs some kind of pre-processing. Okay, deep learning take much longer to train. The machine learning can be trained in a reduced amount of time, and the explainability of deep learning is difficult. So you don't really always understand that why the machine is taking such kind of decision. So that's why another discipline which is getting very popular is called as XAI, which is the short form of explainable AI. Okay, which is coming up particularly for this reason. Okay, but for machine learning, it is more or less the decision is clear, and can be used in unexpected way, means that as we said that it can be actually can be a universal approximation algorithm. Okay, so for many things you can use it, and this is what if you compare performance of machine learning algorithm with deep learning algorithm, right? So when the amount of data, the performance of deep learning algorithm is said to actually scale linearly, okay, with the amount of data available. Okay, we can take this with a pinch of salt. So this is a very general kind of a statement. Okay, but of course, deep learning needs more amount of data, and with more amount of data, it can actually give better performance than traditional machine learning algorithms. Okay, so again, it's a meme time, because this deep learning are highly parameterized, so many things to learn, so it takes a long time to train. So it says that they are in some planet where 7 years, which is 1 year is equivalent to 7 years on Earth. So this guy is saying that, great, I will train my model here. So such is the training time requirement for deep learning models. So after that, after this 2006 2009 time frame, so people were trying to now people realized that, okay, deep learning is going to be the future. So then they tried to do like very many type of improvements in this thing. So one of the things that they thought was actually using better activation function. Okay, so this is the sigmoid function that we are looking at, and if we take the derivative of this, see how the derivative looks. Okay, so you might think that okay, the derivative looks fine, it's a nice U-shaped curve. What is the problem? The problem is in the chain rule. Okay, so this derivative will also come into play, and different neural layers, so there will be multiple layers, all of them, if they use the sigmoid function, the derivative of that function is going to be quite small. Okay, so you see that it is quite small. So especially these are often called as saturation regions, right? And you know, your gradient is very, very small over here. Okay, your gradient is very, very small over here. Another problem which we also saw was that the output of the sigmoid neuron was between 0 to 1. And it turns out, again, I will not, this again needs detailed mathematical explanation, but always, like mathematicians like variables to be centered around 0. Okay, so if you think about the normal distribution, it is centered around 0, right? So, but the sigmoid output is not centered around 0 because the output is between 0 to 1. Okay, so what people did is they came with some other function which is also similarly S-shaped, okay, but had a better gradient. You see that this is a better gradient now. Okay, when I say better gradient, I mean to say that, see, there the values are larger compared to this, and this is 0 centered between -1 to +1. Okay, so this was the first improvement people brought in, and then they realized that when there will be multiple layers, they will run into a problem called as vanishing gradient. So what is the what do I mean by that? So as you know, maybe here when you are calculating, it is a multiplication of 3 derivative terms, but when you are down layer, you know, near input layer, you may have 30-40 terms already, and some of them are derivative of this activation function which are very, very small. So, and you remember that derivative, so you're learning that your step size is again this basic equation. How you are changing your gradient is actually proportional to this, right? Which is learning rate, also this, right? So as the gradient will be very small, what can happen that you can learn at a good rate at the initial layers, but when you go to the at the last layers, right, you can learn faster and you can converge, but the initial layers will learn very slowly. Okay, so this gave you a problem of vanishing gradient, and for that people came up with another kind of activation function which is called as ReLU, or rectified linear unit. So here, you know, it is very simple that if it is positive, okay, so you know, you have like gradient of x itself, okay, and if it is negative, then actually you don't have any gradient. Okay, so now you see that this gradient is unbounded, it is not between 0 to 1, right? So as a result of which you don't run into this vanishing gradient problem. So these were also, you know, further improved, okay, which is called as leaky ReLU, parameterized leaky ReLU, to solve certain problems of ReLU. But right now, if you want to build a neural network of your own, so this is the activation function you will generally use. You don't need to, so people will not question you if you use the activation function ReLU. Okay. Also, people were thinking of better optimization techniques. Okay, so before I explain you better on optimization techniques, I will also quickly tell you about contour plots. So this is one way to, you know, visualize a 3D kind of error surface in 2D plane. So basically, you know, as there are 3 variables, you have x1 and x2, and you are want to find out the corresponding loss value like j, right? You need a plot like this, and you can understand that you cannot visualize this in 2D plot. So for that, people came up with something called as a contour plot. So this is very interesting. So the idea is that you see that there are concentric circles. So these concentric circles actually represent different levels of loss, because you don't have a place to have the third variable. So, you know, all points on this concentric circle has the same value of loss. Okay, so same value of x1 and x2 and same value of loss and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is called as the contour plot. So why this is required, I will explain in a short while. So essentially what you want to do is you actually reach the most inner concentric circle, because here the loss value is minimum. Okay, so that is what you want. So you can think of just taking different slices, right? If you cut slices of this surface, okay, and you can, so the error here, right, the error here, okay, will be same. You can see from here, and maybe this tip is actually the center point. Okay, so this is just the representation in 2D plot. So why it is required, I am going to explain you. So basically in I think, is there a question or something? Okay. So I'll come to the questions later. Okay, so basically this gradient descent actually has different versions. So one possibility is you calculate the gradient for the entire training set on which you are training, okay, or entire data set. So that is your vanilla gradient descent. What you can do is you can divide them into batch, because calculating this gradient for the entire set when probably you have millions and billions of data is difficult. So for that, what you do is you go and calculate you break down into batches, like we typically do, and you calculate the gradient for the mini batches. And the extreme end is that you calculate the gradient for each point. So it is no longer the cost function, but at the loss function that we are updating the weights. Okay. So you might be thinking that why this is required, because so far I was making you into believing that I have a very nice loss function like this. So this is not a reality. In reality, you will have a loss function like this, where there will be a global minima and there will be a local minima. So if you start from here, there is a high chance you will get stuck here. You will not come out of here, right? So here, if there is a positive gradient, so you'll come back here, right? And similarly, if you start here, this is called as a plateau. After some time, the gradient will become 0. Okay, so how actually you can get about this, okay, or go around this? So there is a concept called as this is the problem of gradient descent, that if you think that a ball is rolling, okay, so you'll be very slow at these places and you can get stuck over here and you may not reach here. So this is a problem with gradient descent. Okay, and what can happen is, so in physical world you could have solved it using momentum. So if a ball is rolling from here, so it will not actually reach, it will not reach a 0 speed over here in the local minima. So it will have some speed still, okay, from its inertia, right, and it will actually jump past this. Okay, so for that there was a very interesting idea. What people did was that they thought that we will not calculate, or we will not only take the gradient from here, but we'll maintain a history which will give me gradient of what it was here. So if I accumulate them, then even if my gradient becomes 0 over here, okay, from the current gradient, but I am also maintaining a history of the previous gradient, so I will have some gradient to go over the local minima. Okay, so that's actually gave rise to very sophisticated optimizers. So again, like I said, ReLU is state of art as far as activation function is concerned. As far as optimizer is concerned, you have Adam optimizer, which is based on momentum and some other things, which again I cannot take here because of the brevity of time. Okay, and this is a illustration that how different optimization algorithms work. So you see that some algorithms actually slows down, and some can find and go into the local minima, and some algorithms you can actually make them reach the global optima if you handle this these learning rates, these momentums carefully. Okay, so these are some improvements which came after 2009, which further improves this deep neural network discipline. Okay, and these are different types of neural networks. Okay, so what we have seen so far is like your perceptron. Then with this is your feed forward network. You can also use it as a radial basis network. Okay, where you can bring more nonlinearity. The thing that we discussed were mostly with deep forward networks. So these are also kind of classification networks, but with multiple layers. RNN is a type of network which actually is used for sequential data. Okay, so you see that there is a feedback path kind of here. Okay, so there is some sequence involved, and which are improved in terms of long short-term memory and gated recurrent unit, which are part of recurrent unit. So these are recurrent neural units are very good for your speech processing, your language modeling. So one typical problem is that if you write something in WhatsApp, right, so it predicts the next word, right? So that is a sequence problem. Based on your what word you have typed, it is predicting the next one. So that is a particular case where you use this recurrent neural network kind of thing, right, which are different from deep feed forward network. Then there are something called as an autoencoder. Very interesting concept, but probably I will not go into this. Okay, so let me try to tell you this. So let's say that this autoencoder has different inputs from a AP series, right? The arithmetic progression series. So what autoencoder, and you don't know, so that that it is a AP series, but the computer program doesn't know, right? It comes from a AP series, and you have given it the task of predicting the next one. So autoencoder can actually find out the first term and this ratio term, okay, which are the parameters of the AP series. Okay, so autoencoder actually learn the hidden representation of the data. Okay, and then there are various improvements over autoencoder. So this is also a phenomenal area where there are a lot of work happening. And then you have something called as convolutional network. So just remember, convolutional networks actually are specialized for images. So basically, if you are trying to do trying to have a autonomous autonomous car, so it needs to take continuous photos and understand whether there are some obstacles here and there, right? So that is the scenario where we can use convolutional neural net, and it has two components. So one layer, you try to find out better representation of the images. Okay, not again going into more details of that. And then there is another type which is called as GAN, generative adversarial network. So the deepfake use case that I talked about actually actually comes from this generative adversarial network. Okay, so I think that kinds of give you a quick summary of neural networks. So the magical capability of biological neurons, because that was, as I said, the basic unit of artificial intelligence, inspired ANN. And then MP neuron came, and this was improved by perceptron, and it was like the thing we were waiting for until it was challenged by the XOR problem in 1969. Then you understood that multi-layer perceptron is required, but how to train a multi-layer perceptron? So at that point, backpropagation came and kind of steadied the ship. So even after that, training deep neural network was not possible until a breakthrough in terms of unsupervised pre-training came in, as I said, 2006, 2009. And after that, there has been several developments like newer optimizers, activation function, regularization, and this neural network-based models has actually beaten all other state-of-the-art machine learning models comprehensively across various domains and various type of tasks. Okay, so which kind of convinces that for learning now deep learning is the way to go. Okay, and so I thank you for listening patiently to me. And this is a very favorite quote of mine, that essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. So you always, so when I say all models are wrong, you start with some assumptions, so they are not completely right, but they can be very useful. Probably you can think by the, or you can realize by the magical things that deep neural networks can do. So I can take, let me check with the, let me stop sharing this. Okay, and let me check with the organizers that if you have any, if you have further maybe 5 minutes, I can take you through a hands-on.
Thank you, Saptarshi sir. Shall we take some questions from
Yes,
audience?
absolutely.
Okay. Some question is coming from Orkojyoti Banerjee. Is ReLU somehow related to support vector machine? Is ReLU somehow related to support vector machine?
No, not really. Not really. It is related to support vector machine. I think maybe like looking at the like linear line, you may have thought that ReLU is somewhat related. No, ReLU is not related to that.
Okay, next question is from Shovik Raja. What is the best method for optimization?
What is the best method of optimization? So your basic static point is gradient descent, and nowadays, as I said, that people mostly use this Adam optimizer, which improves gradient descent by introducing this concept of momentum, and it also has something called as adaptive learning rate. So that is also a very interesting point. So basically, when you are far away from the minima, okay, you can have a high learning rate, but when you are converging, you actually reduce the learning rate. So Adam utilizes both this. So that's why Adam actually stands for adaptive. Okay, so this is the optimizer that is now mostly being used.
Related to this optimization, I also have a question. Depending on input, what type of optimization function should we follow?
Depending on input. So actually, only thing that neural network requires is that the inputs needs to be scaled between 0 to 1. Okay, and so one of the thing about deep neural network is that you really need not do lot of pre-processing and everything. Okay, actually neural networks are more agnostic to input data. It can at one side handle structured data like of machine learning algorithms. On the other side, it can handle video, image, and speech, and so on and so forth, and text. Okay, so you really need not worry so much about that. Only thing is that whatever is there, you will have to give a numerical input in a vector form to the neural network.
Okay, thank you. And next question is from Shovik Raja. How does rectilinear activation function solve the vanishing gradient problem in neural network?
Yes. So if you see that rectified linear network, so the function is that on the gradient you can have like maybe 2x. Okay, the function is like 2x whenever it is greater than 0. So you know that it is if you calculate the gradient, it is proportional to x. So it is never going to be very small value like it was happening for a it is not going to be any small value when you are in case of your sigmoid neuron or tanh activation.
Thank you. And Orkojyoti Banerjee raised a question. And do the optimizer algorithm require gradient computation also for a particular ML problem? How should one decide which one to use?
Okay, so if you are so generally, ML algorithms, we have not used so much like momentums and everything. I think that is a overkill. But generally, you will use either mini batch gradient descent or stochastic gradient descent more than the gradient descent because stochastic gradient descent, I will tell at a very high level, is less prone to get caught in the local minima.
Then Orgho Kushumdas said, is there any rule of thumb as to decide how many numbers of hidden layers to keep, and also how many numbers of neurons should be in one hidden layer?
No, these are hyperparameters. We call these as hyperparameters. And there is a separate subject altogether which we call as hyperparameter tuning. Okay, but typically we'll start with less number of layers and less number of neurons per layer, and you will see how you are doing on the performance. And if you're not happy with the performance, maybe you will kind of make it as a search problem where you will make the layers as a variable and find out that what is a good number of layers.
So can we say, sir, if the number of output, that is depending of output category, that is if it is binary or if it is say multiple category is there, then we can use the optimizer algorithm according to that?
No, the optimizer algorithm will not depend on that, but what will depend is the loss function. What will depend is the activation function. Okay, so as example, if it is a binary classification problem, so the output that you expect is the probability of one of the classes, which is between 0 to 1. Yes. So there you cannot have ReLU as the activation function. So the last output layer you will use a sigmoid, because sigmoid gives a value between 0 to 1. So if it is a multi-class classification problem, there is another activation function which is called as softmax, which is to be used at the output layer. So if you look at activation function, there are activation functions in the hidden layer, and there is an activation function at the output layer. So the output layer activation function can change based on the problem, whether it is a classification problem, a regression problem, a binary classification problem, a multi-class classification problem. But the hidden layer activation functions will not change. Basically, we will use ReLU.
Next question is Samudra Samudra. I think we can solve the perceptron XOR roadblock with using two threshold by using the complex number for weights and bias. What do you think of this? I'm repeating.
That is an interesting way to look at it. But always what we have thought is that these are so they were coming up with this trying to model this biological neurons, right? So not much with the real number inputs and outputs, like complex outputs, but that can be a thought process, and I am sure some people would have researched on that. Interesting question, I must say.
Okay, thank you. Orkojyoti Banerjee said, if the number of neurons, more the number of neurons you use, greater the chances of overfitting and greater the computation power required.
Yes, of course. So I think probably you want to say that where I will stop. So there are different regularization techniques. So that's why regularization is studied separately in neural networks. Okay, so you have standard like L1 normalization, L2 normalizations, which are there. Okay, sorry, L2 regularization, L1 regularization that we have in standard machine learning. But you have a very interesting regularization called as dropout. Okay, so if you are interested, look at search on dropout, and it will tell you that how even with many layers you can achieve not overfitting.
Okay. And one more question from my end. If we are using the DL, then what kind of framework we should follow? Is it TensorFlow, Keras, or which one should follow at this stage? Basically, the students who are now presently in sixth semester.
I think TensorFlow, Keras is the best one. Now, also you have PyTorch, but you will get more tutorial and more resources on TensorFlow. So I think probably I will not get time to show you this, but let me put the link over here. Okay, so everyone can run on their own, and then if there is an issue, they can get back to me. Okay, I see one question from Mohua. What is the difference between learning rate and bias? Okay. learning rate actually is the rate at which you are learning, right? So as I said that these different weights, how that will get changed is actually your learning rate, and the bias actually represents your threshold. So as I said that, if you are a pro cinema goer, then you may have a high bias, okay, and if you are like more open one, a movie buff, you will have a lower bias.
Okay, next question is from Harkojit Banerjee. Can we use the learning curves to determine the number of neurons and hidden layer a particular problem needs?
Yes, of course. I mean, again, there is a strategy called as early stopping. Okay, so essentially, what you do is you divide your data into training, testing, and validation. Okay, so what you do is if your model is prone to overfitting, then your model will overfit on training. But if you have a separate set on which, so parallelly you are building epoch by epoch, you are training a model and testing that on validation set. Okay, so where you see that your improvement in training set is going up, but there is no improvement on validation set, you know that your model has started overfitting. Okay, so there you can actually stop by monitoring the performance that you are talking about.
One of my another question is that if say we have approximately 1,000 of picture, and some objects are in different places, and every image size is say approximately 100 into 100 resolution. The object specifically resides somehow in top position and somehow in bottom position. And how can we actually consider this in a common category to categorize the object?
So basically, when you are building a machine, building a learning machine, you want it to make it scale invariant, rotation invariant, and all this. Okay, so there are several properties when you have in this convolutional neural network where you don't actually look in this manner at a particular particular position of the picture you are looking at this, because you take the image into much smaller blocks. Okay, so even if a human face appears in the middle or or somewhere in the corner, it knows that okay, this has a nose and eyes, so this is a human face. Okay, so this is one way. And also one other thing that you can do is when you are feeding to the neural network, there is a strategy called as data augmentation. So when you are training the network itself, so if you have maybe image at the center and it is a straight face, you will make it in different places. You can scale it, you can rotate it, create new artificial inputs and feed it. So that way neural network learns all the patterns.
So what kind of function should we use for that? Is it data scaling invariant or something like any function?
No.
Is available?
You don't need to do anything in particular. Data augmentation is something which you actually need to implement as a block. Okay, but this what I said about this invariance is automatically inbuilt in CNN architecture. So
this is automatically invariant under data augmentation.
Now data augmentation will help you augment your inputs. That is one solution. And I'm telling you, even without that, CNN has the capability to handle this kind of invariances.
Okay. Thank you. And I think two more questions is here. The Gyan Krishna, what kind of deep learning model we used for tracking objects? What kind of data learning model are we used for tracking objects?
Okay, so now it is getting very specific questions. So basically I talked about CNN, and then there is a set of CNNs which talks about object. So CNNs are actually for classification. So it can classify different objects. Okay, this is a commonplace object. Maybe this is a glass, this is a chair, this is a table, like that. Okay, now you have something called as region-based models. So it takes an image and it can localize different portions and can track objects. Okay, so such models. So you have models like YOLO You have models like Faster RCNN, which handles that. And then when you do a tracking between between different passing images, so you can find the location of the image, so location of the object in the frame, okay, and then you can track the path, okay, so that can give you this object tracking.
I think one more questions, Bormon sir. What are the uses of RNN when using them with the reinforcement learning?
Okay, so I have not really covered reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning is, more of a can you suggest resources to learn reinforcement learning? So frankly, our group do not work so much on reinforcement learning, but I have some of our colleagues in Data Science Lab, Calcutta University. So I can ask for some resources from them. I have some, good materials on that. So reinforcement learning, as you know, it is more of a framework, okay, and you can actually keep this framework and even use neural networks to train. So reinforcement learning actually is a more trial and error approach than your supervised learning at a very high level. So I don't think we can try to answer this question in this scope, but I hope that gives you a direction.
Another questions, can please suggest some resources to learn reinforcement learning?
Yeah, so I answered both of them.
Thank you, Dr. Saptarshi Goswami sir. We are enlightened by your knowledge in this very important topic. Now there is a small announcement. The feedback link is provided in the Google Meet chat, YouTube live chat, and YouTube description. Those who submit the feedback form will be awarded a certificate within 15 days. But link will be active till 2 p.m. Any questions from audience? Saptarshi sir, could you share your email?
Yes, of course.
Samudra S.
I think if you just search by my name, you will get it. Anyway. So can we close it now?
Now time to vote of thanks, sir.
Okay.
It gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for this event to all dignitaries assembled here. First, I would like to thank Dr. Saptarshi Goswami, who honored this session with his invaluable thoughts on the topic. I would also like to thank our beloved principal sir, Dr. Monishankar Rai, our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shinjini Basu, staff members, participating students, and all our patient audience for making this webinar a grand success. Once again, I thank one and all present here. Thank you, and signing off for today.